Melanie smiled sweetly, telling me she loved me. Her voice was smooth, practiced, perfectly tuned to sound genuine, but I knew better. I had known for weeks. I stayed quiet, returning her gaze with the same unreadable expression I had perfected over the years. No anger, no suspicion, just silence. That was the trick, wasn't it? She believed she was in control because I never confronted her, never exploded, never even hinted that I had seen the text messages, the hotel receipts, the little lies woven so seamlessly into our conversations. She thought she had outmaneuvered me. Let her think that. I watched her pour herself a glass of wine, her fingers adorned with the ring I had given her 5 years ago. It was ironic, really. The same hand she used to caress me was the one she used to send her little love notes to someone else. She took a sip, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "So what do you want to do this weekend?" she asked casually, leaning against the kitchen counter. I shrugged, not sure yet. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her lips twitching, barely perceptible, but I caught it, that brief flicker of excitement, the kind she used to have when she looked at me. I clenched my jaw but kept my tone light. "Something important?" She shook her head too quickly. "Just work stuff." I knew exactly who had texted her. And in less than 24 hours, so would everyone else. I checked my watch. Just a few minutes left. She continued talking, oblivious to the fact that this was the last moment before her life would split in two. The before and the after. Then, right on schedule, her phone buzzed again. And then again. She frowned, unlocking the screen. I watched her face shift from mild confusion to outright panic. "What the?" She clicked one message, then another, her breath coming faster. I pulled out my own phone and leaned against the counter, mirroring her stance. And then, as if on cue, my message popped up on her screen. "Since you love sharing secrets, let's make sure everyone knows them." The color drained from her face. Showtime. Melanie's breath hitched as her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Her face was frozen in disbelief, her once confident smirk wiped clean. I could almost hear the gears in her head turning, trying to make sense of how everything had unraveled so suddenly. The world she had carefully curated, the web of lies she had spun so effortlessly, was collapsing in real time. She scrolled through the flood of messages, her lips parting as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Her phone vibrated incessantly, each new notification a fresh wound tearing through the illusion she had created. She swallowed hard and looked up at me, but I didn't say a word. I simply watched. Her hands trembled as she clicked on a message from her sister, then one from her mother. I knew what they said. I had crafted my revenge with surgical precision. The carefully selected words weren't just exposing her lies, they were unraveling her very identity in the eyes of the people she valued most. "Melanie, what the hell is this? Is this some kind of joke? Tell me this isn't true." Panic flickered in her eyes as she tapped out a response, only to hesitate. What could she possibly say? That it wasn't her in the pictures? That the texts were fabricated? She knew there was no way out. Everything was too detailed, too damning, too real. She looked up at me, her expression now a twisted mix of anger and desperation. "Logan, what did you do?" Her voice was breathless, barely above a whisper. I tilted my head slightly, as if I were genuinely puzzled by the question. "Me?" I finally said, my tone as calm as ever. "I didn't do anything, Melanie. I just made sure the truth wasn't hidden anymore." She exhaled sharply, frustration mounting as she tried to regain some control. "This isn't fair," she muttered, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could somehow keep her grounded. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "Fair? You want to talk about fairness now?" I leaned in just slightly, enough for her to see the cold amusement in my eyes. "You lied to me for months. Lied to my face. Walked around like you had everything handled. Like you had me wrapped around your finger." Melanie's jaw clenched as she wiped a hand across her face, her mind working overtime to come up with some way out. She glanced at her phone again, swiping through the endless messages, her breathing growing more erratic. Then, as if realizing that her family wasn't the only audience to her downfall, she let out a shaky gasp. My boss, she whispered, eyes widening in horror. Bing. I watched her unlock a new message, the one from her employer. I already knew what it said. We need to talk first thing in the morning. This kind of behavior reflects poorly on our company. Melanie let out a small, strangled noise, half gasp, half whimper. She understood what this meant. Her carefully maintained professional reputation, the thing she had worked so hard to build, was now under threat. She looked up at me again, this time with pure desperation. Logan, please, she begged, stepping toward me. You don't have to do this. We can fix this, I swear. Just tell them it's not what it looks like. I smirked. Oh, but it is exactly what it looks like. She shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair now a mess as she clutched her phone in a death grip. You don't understand. My job, my family. Logan, they're going to disown me. I gave her a slow, measured nod. Yes, Melanie, they probably will. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She had played her game well, thinking she was untouchable, believing she could keep everything separate. Her deception had been masterful, but she had forgotten one thing. I don't explode. I don't shout. I don't break things in rage. I wait, I plan, and when I strike, it's final. Melanie let out a shuddering breath, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Please, Logan, she whispered. Don't let this happen. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us, watching as the weight of reality pressed down on her. Then, with the same calm precision I had maintained all along, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my own phone, and tapped the screen. Her face lit up with hope for half a second, until she saw what I was doing. With one final press of my finger, I blocked her number. She gasped, looking up at me in disbelief. No, you can't. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door. Just before stepping out, I glanced back over my shoulder. Goodbye, Melanie. And then I was gone. Melanie stood there, frozen, as the door clicked shut behind me. For a moment, she didn't move. She didn't breathe. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her, suffocating and unbearable. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her thoughts racing so fast she could barely form a coherent one. She stared at her phone, still vibrating with new messages, each one a fresh dagger to her already shredded reputation. Her hands trembled as she swiped through the onslaught of texts, desperate to find someone, anyone who would believe her side of the story. But there was no defense. There was no spinning this into something salvageable. Her mother's name flashed on the screen. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the answer button, but before she could press it, another message popped up. You disgust me. Her stomach dropped. It was from her sister. The floodgates burst open and more messages followed in rapid succession. I defended you when people called you selfish. Turns out they were right. How could you do this to Logan? After everything he's done for you, we're done. Don't bother coming around for the holidays. A choked sob escaped Melanie's lips. Her family, her foundation, was crumbling beneath her feet. She had always taken their support for granted, assuming that no matter what, they would be in her corner. But now they were severing ties as quickly as Logan had exposed her. She staggered back against the kitchen counter, gripping it for support. Her legs felt weak, her body unsteady as the full gravity of her downfall sank in. Then, another notification. Her boss. With shaking fingers, she opened the message. I expect you in my office at 9 a.m. sharp. There is no excuse for this level of unprofessionalism. We'll discuss your future with the company then. Future. The word felt like a cruel joke. Melanie had always been careful to keep her work life separate from her personal one. She prided herself on her reputation in the office. Smart, driven, poised, a woman who had her life together. But now, all of that was slipping away because Logan had made sure that everyone saw who she really was. A horrifying thought crossed her mind. Did the clients see this too? She fumbled to open her email, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was met with an inbox flooded with subject lines she never wanted to see. We need to talk about your conduct. Clarification needed regarding recent allegations. Urgent reputation concerns. Each email chipped away at the image she had so carefully built over the years. Each one was a reminder that she had not only lost Logan, She had lost everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she sank to the floor, pressing her forehead against her knees. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had been so careful. Logan was supposed to be blind to her indiscretions, wrapped around her finger, blissfully unaware. But he had known, and he had waited. He had let her dig her own grave, let her enjoy her delusions of control, and when the moment was right, he had flipped the switch and sent her entire world into free fall. The realization burned. She had underestimated him. She had always thought of Logan as the composed, quiet one, the man who never raised his voice, never showed his hand. But now she saw the truth. He wasn't weak. He wasn't naive. He was ruthless. A fresh wave of panic surged through her. She needed to fix this. She needed to undo the damage. Grabbing her phone, she scrolled through her contacts and pressed Logan's name. It rang. Once. Then, the number you have dialed is no longer in service. A strangled gasp left her lips. She tried again, but the same robotic message greeted her. He had blocked her, cut her off completely. No, no, she whispered frantically. This couldn't be happening. She rushed to the door, yanking it open so fast it slammed against the wall. She needed to talk to him. She needed to fix this. Her bare feet slapped against the pavement as she stumbled toward her car, her mind a whirlwind of desperation and denial. She had to find him, make him listen, beg if she had to. But as she reached her car and grabbed the handle, another realization hit her. Where would she even go? Logan wasn't going to listen. He wasn't going to give her a second chance. He had made his decision. Cold, calculated, and final. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. Her fingers slipped from the handle as her vision blurred. She slumped against the car, her body shaking, her breath coming in uneven gasps. For the first time, she understood. She had spent so much time believing she was in control, but she had never been. Logan had seen her for exactly what she was. And now, so did everyone else, and there was no coming back from it. Melanie stood outside in the cool night air, her heart pounding against her ribcage. The silence of the empty street seemed deafening, pressing in on her as she clutched her phone in her trembling hands. She tried calling Logan again, but it was useless. His number was blocked, his presence erased from her life as if she had never existed to him at all. The weight of that reality settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Her world, her carefully crafted image, her relationships, her career had all been shattered in a matter of minutes. She had spent so long believing she was in control, that she could balance her double life, slipping effortlessly between roles without consequence. But now, for the first time, she felt the crushing realization that she had never been the one holding the strings. Logan had, and she had walked right into his trap. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, choked and hollow. How could she have been so blind? She had thought she was the master manipulator, weaving her lies seamlessly, fooling everyone, especially Logan. But he had seen through her. Not only that, he had waited, watched, collected every piece of evidence, and then, with one perfectly timed strike, he had unraveled her life. She leaned against the car for support, pressing her fingers into the cool metal as if it could somehow ground her. Her breathing was ragged, uneven, as panic clawed its way up her throat. Fix this. That was the only thought she could hold on to. But how? The messages wouldn't stop coming. Her phone kept lighting up with notifications, each one another reminder that there was nowhere left to hide. Friends who once adored her now saw her for who she really was. Her family, disgusted, betrayed. Her colleagues, they would never look at her the same way again. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, every excuse she could give. Could she twist the story? Claim it was all a misunderstanding? Frame Logan as a controlling, vengeful ex trying to ruin her life? No, the evidence was too damning. The pictures, the texts, the receipts, there was no way to spin it. Tears burned in her eyes as she slid to the ground, her back against the car. She had always been so good at talking her way out of things, at making people believe what she wanted them to believe. But now, for the first time in her life, she was speechless. What was left to say? A new wave of dread swept over her as she thought about the morning ahead. Her boss had been cold, distant in his message. We'll discuss your future with the company. That wasn't a warning. It was a prelude to termination. She had worked for years to build her career, climbing the ranks with careful precision, ensuring that she was seen as professional, ambitious, untouchable. Now, one message had been enough to bring it all down. Logan hadn't just exposed her to the people who mattered personally. He had made sure that her entire life was dismantled. And the worst part? He hadn't even had to raise his voice. He hadn't confronted her in anger, hadn't screamed, hadn't begged for an explanation. He had simply removed her, like she was nothing, like she had never mattered at all. That realization stung deeper than she had expected. She had assumed that, no matter what, Logan would always be there, always waiting for her with quiet devotion. That no matter how reckless she was, he would be there to clean up the mess, to forgive, to stay. But she had underestimated him. He hadn't just walked away, he had erased her. Her throat tightened, and she clutched her phone as if it held the answer to everything. But all it held was silence. No Logan, no sympathy, no escape. She pulled herself to her feet, the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. Her mind screamed for a solution, but for the first time in her life, she had none. Everything was gone. Her reputation, her job, her family, her security, her safety net had been yanked away, and now she was free-falling with nothing to catch her. She stumbled toward her front door, fumbling with the keys. The moment she stepped inside, the silence felt even louder than the chaos outside. This place, once a sanctuary, once a carefully maintained facade of a happy home, felt like an empty shell, because that's what it was now. And she walked through the living room in a daze, her eyes flickering over the familiar details of her life. Photographs on the shelves, a vase of fresh flowers on the table, the remnants of a carefully curated existence. A life that just hours ago had seemed so secure. Now, it was nothing more than a stage set for a performance that had ended in disaster. She reached for a framed photo of her and Logan, her fingers tracing the edges absently. They looked happy, so effortlessly perfect together. A picture she had used to keep up appearances, to sell the illusion of a devoted girlfriend. Her grip tightened, and before she could stop herself, she hurled the frame across the room. It shattered against the wall, the sound echoing in the empty space. But even that didn't bring relief. Nothing did. She sank onto the couch, her hands gripping her head as the enormity of her downfall washed over her. There was no fixing this, no way to turn back time. Logan had left her nothing but the truth. The one thing she had spent her entire life avoiding, and now she had no choice but to live with it. Melanie sat in the middle of the mess she had created, surrounded by broken glass and the deafening silence of an empty home. The remnants of the shattered picture frame lay scattered across the floor, a fitting metaphor for her life. Something once whole, now reduced to jagged, irreparable fragments. She had always believed that no matter what happened, she would land on her feet. She had relied on her charm, her ability to manipulate situations, to turn any crisis into an opportunity. But this time was different. This time, there was no way out. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone again, desperately searching for someone, anyone, who might still be on her side. But with every name she scrolled past, she knew the truth. No one was coming to save her. Her family had cut ties, unwilling to defend the person she had become. Her friends, those who had laughed with her, gone out with her, praised her for her ability to handle Logan, had gone silent. Not a single one had reached out in support. Not even him, the man she had risked everything for, the one she had chosen over Logan time and time again. The affair that had been so intoxicating, so thrilling, was now nothing more than a ghost. She opened her messages, scrolling until she found his name. She hesitated for a moment before typing. "Did you see what he did?" Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. Her heart pounded as she sent another. "I need to talk. Please pick up." Still silence. Her fingers clenched around the phone, the weight of his absence settling in her chest like a stone. Of course, he wasn't answering. Why would he? Men like him never stayed when things got difficult. He had been there for the fun, for the secrecy, for the thrill of getting away with something forbidden. But now that everything was out in the open, now that she had been exposed, she was no longer an escape. She was a liability, a pathetic, desperate mess with nowhere left to turn. Tears blurred her vision as she tossed her phone onto the couch, her body shaking with the effort to hold herself together. But there was nothing to hold on to. Logan had taken everything from her in one calculated move, and the worst part was, he hadn't even needed to lie. He had simply revealed the truth. That was what stung the most. She had always assumed she would be the one to leave first, to move on to something better when she was ready. She had imagined ending things with Logan on her terms, breaking free when it was convenient for her. Instead, he had beaten her to it, and he had made sure she was left with nothing. A sudden sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her breath caught. For one wild, stupid second, she thought it was Logan. That he had changed his mind, come back to give her one last chance. She nearly ran to the door before reason caught up with her. It wasn't Logan. It would never be Logan. Taking a deep breath, she wiped at her eyes and opened the door. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Calloway. A woman in her 60s who had always given her tight smiles and polite nods in the hallway, but nothing more. Tonight, though, her expression was different. Concerned, pitying. "I heard some noise," Mrs. Calloway said, glancing past her into the disheveled living room. "Are you okay, dear?" Melanie forced a smile, but she could feel how weak it was, how empty. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just a rough night." The older woman studied her carefully. "I saw what happened," she said gently. "Everyone did." Melanie's stomach twisted. She wanted to slam the door in the woman's face, to hide from the way she was being looked at, as if she were something pitiful, something broken. Instead, she swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Yeah," she whispered. "I know." Mrs. Calloway hesitated, then sighed. "Well, if you need anything, I suppose you know where to find me." Melanie didn't respond. She simply nodded, then shut the door before she could see more of that pity. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She didn't want pity. She wanted her life back. But as she looked around at the wreckage of everything she had built, her relationships, her career, her carefully maintained image, she realized there was no getting it back. Logan had made sure of that, and for the first time, she understood what it meant to truly lose.